Welcome to Inside Social Care, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the care industry. Join us as we explore the challenges, celebrate the triumphs, and shine a spotlight on the incredible people who make up the social care workforce. From personal stories to policy deep dives, we're here to give you an unfiltered look at the heart of our communities. This is Inside Social Care, and this is where we start the conversation. My guest today is the best-selling author of Saving Social Care. He's the founder of Care Friends. He's an internationally acclaimed speaker, and he's the global thought leader on recruitment and retention in social care. It is Neil Eastwood.
Hi, Charles.
Great to be
Was
here.
that
all correct?
That was all correct. Yeah, I would have gone a bit further on some of them, but that's all correct.
What did I miss?
Well, no, the new book isn't out, so we can't do that.
What is the new book?
Oh, it's a memoir. It's called Neil, Son of God, but I'm not going to go into that any detail.
Okay.
It's the publishing restrictions. But yeah, no, otherwise there's been some interesting journey with Care Friends and foster care, but we can touch on that later.
Great. Amazing. Okay, cool. Well, we've got a full docket today, Neil. So let's just jump right in. You're obviously an expert on recruitment and retention in social care. What are the stories at the moment?
Well, I think it's a really interesting time to be, an expert in this topic because it's changing so fast that it's very hard to keep on top of it. I think the overarching themes are the end of international recruitment, or certainly the tide is going out that way, and there's no sign of that changing. So a lot of providers will have over-relied on international recruitment and now scrambling to think, what can we do? And we've seen as well the impact of that with Skills for Care data telling us that and which is, I think, the key worrying statistic which we looked up on, which is the UK-born care workforce is shrinking quickly. We need to stop that, reverse it, and grow it. We've got a lot of challenges there. And I think in the current market, there is a sort of, approaching a recession. There's certainly the jobs market is employers aren't hiring. And that is a positive for health and social care. Generally, sessions we do well. So that's a kind of slightly positive tailwind. And then I think we've got legislation coming that everyone's preparing for around workers' rights, which are going to lots of things for employers who are still grappling with the high costs of their employees now with national insurance increases and so on. So I think you have many, many factors are coming together. I think that it's net negative, but I think, the big opportunity, maybe we'll cover a bit of that today, is that there's inefficiency in the way we recruit and retain in the sector. And I think there's the opportunity.
Okay, cool. A lot of things to dive into there. So let's take that first one, international recruitment. I think, if I go back over the last 3, 4, 5 years, think back to 2021 and 2022 when the house really was on fire. And I guess, you've been flying the flag for challenges around recruitment within social care for a number of years now. It's always been in crisis, but in 2021 and 2022, it really was in crisis. We were seeing things like agency spend per bed was doubled over about a 6-month period. Agency rates doubled, turnover rates, increased a few percentage points, which obviously makes a big difference. And then 2022, obviously that international recruitment piece just came in a big way, and we saw a few 100,000 people come into the sector. Now, there are a lot of issues around that. A lot of places it worked really well. A lot of people have brought very, very valued and high quality members of their team in, but also a lot of issues around slavery, people not having enough hours to work, some exploitation of the workforce, and that's obviously been stopped. What are you hearing from providers now about what they're doing with their international recruiting?
I think the international recruiting now is focused mostly on who's in the country anyway. And some of them come with issues, not all, but some come with issues. I think we're seeing leakage of people who come in. Many of them, their ultimate destination is perhaps to the NHS and not to social care. Or they want to move around the country to where they have a family connection, perhaps, and that wasn't necessarily the first job they took. So we do still have in the system some international recruits that are kind of dampening this negative effect. But you're absolutely right. I think it's a real roller coaster, and that it's almost worse than not doing it was to go full in and then drop it as quickly as possible. And that has led
Mm,
a lot of providers to think, what on earth are we going to do now? And they are starting to look at, their general recruitment practices and their focus on the local community. I do think, though, we still do have, because each international worker that came in, broadly speaking, works twice the hours of someone local. In many cases, even more than that. You're getting a
mm,
two for one deal, and you're also
mm,
getting, generally speaking, very high retention. So those two
mhm,
things are a shock absorber against what is actually happening underneath the surface, which is as soon as these people go, then or demand grows or the other locals leave, you need a strategy that you probably don't have. And I think
mhm,
there's been a lot of focus with the increase in national insurance and minimum wage to cut costs. So what I'm hearing a lot of providers saying is they're cutting wherever they can. And that might be affecting, say, software suppliers. It might be
mm.
head office more than the front line, but it's not
But
an
also affecting the front line. I mean, I've been hearing that as well, where there are opportunities to, reduce ratios and de-staff, as it were. I've
yeah.
been hearing
Yeah.
that go on.
Yeah, and some technology might play neatly into that sort of efficiency story and might do well. But generally speaking, there's less money in that world for
Mm,
providers. And that means less, the danger is that there's less for retention techniques and motivation for the existing workforce. And if you've recruited badly, you have people that are quite vulnerable to leaving if they don't feel that they're being valued because, we're not here
mhm,
for salary and we're not here for the working hours. So you really have to be hiring people that are really, really have the right values. And I think perhaps that hasn't happened in the past. I think generally speaking, and it's difficult to generalize, but international recruits are making a big sacrifice. And when I'm recruiting care workers, I'm looking for what you might call sacrifice or putting other people first or having some demonstration of these values with emotional maturity. And you could argue that someone who's prepared to move there initially before they couldn't, their entire family, they were going to come, or they'll leave their family behind to come over. There's certainly a commitment there, and the quality of the people you get sometimes, language aside, but the quality of and the suitability is very, very high. But I think
mm,
that because it was given at the gift, of the government and taken away, it's very difficult for the sector to react to sudden changes where you think, well, we're going to change our whole recruitment system to recruit international, and now we can't. And I think there's a lot of turbulence in HR departments and a lot of
yeah.
challenge in terms of rethinking, learning the muscle of recruiting locally.
For sure. Okay, well, I want to come back to that because you talked a bit about values-based recruitment there, and obviously that's the key thing I want to talk about. But before we get that, I want to just get all the problems out in the open.
Mm,
Earlier, you were talking about the impact of the Employment Rights Bill coming up as
yeah,
well, and I
yeah.
think that's something that a lot of providers are talking about, especially one of the things that are going to affect frontline workforces is fair pay agreements, 0 hours contracting, and day one rights. I think those are probably the big three things. Probably the fair pay agreements is the biggest one.
Uh,
Tell our audience, tell our listeners, what's the story there?
well, I mean, it comes as a sort of
Do you,
basket.
do you have the inside track?
Well, I mean, it's difficult because it's changing all the time, and I don't have the inside track. I mean, I think this is, but what we have to do is look at the mood music here of what the government is trying to do. And on the one hand, it's taxing the employers more heavily. On the other hand, it's giving rights to employees, and that comes with challenges, particularly in our sector, where we are recruiting people who perhaps don't have a professional qualification, and therefore, unless your screening is very good and your selection is very good, you're going to get people in who aren't. We're just looking for some work locally, and that is a problem because the sorts of people that might join might be vexatious in terms of making a claim or expecting using the system a little bit. And I think that's the bigger challenge here is yes, there should be fair pay, absolutely. If that isn't funded, that's going to create even more stress on the system. And I think, and then coming along with that, the Employment Rights Bill, particularly around early dismissals and that kind of thing, where you'll probably see an increase. We don't know the detail yet, but we'll probably see an increase in employment tribunal, and that is all
Mm,
going to be even more stress and mess. So the message I think for employers is that you have to, you're going to have to be very much more fussy in many cases about who you hire in the first place. And if you look at a recruitment process, I think another challenge actually we haven't touched on yet is the use of AI in applications and the use of AI
right.
to screen. So AI is creating the applicants and AI is screening the applicants. It's like you're missing entirely the values piece out of who wants a job in social care? They're very special people.
And are you seeing AI being used a lot in recruitment processes?
Yes, but I am asking in social care, I'm regularly asking recruiters. And I think because it's generally the larger employers who would have, let's say, an applicant tracking system that might
Yeah.
deploy this kind of technology. And that is generally the larger employers. And I'm not seeing it used in anger at the moment. I certainly would say that a lot of applicants would be going on ChatGPT to improve
Mm,
their applications. That's definitely happening. And I'm sure
mm.
we would see that on Indeed. I think the screening side and, is taking time to catch up.
You're a data driven man. I've read your book. You can stack rank what's important to people in their roles, and there are lots of different things that are important to lots of different people. But obviously, pay tends to come out pretty high on top. And there's obviously the storyline that we've heard for years in the sector about people working in care and then being offered 30p an hour more down the road at Tesco and going to work there. Some questions about that and whether those are the right people to have in your organization. But the truth remains that people working in care often on minimum wage rates. It's not very much money. It's gone up 100% in the last 10 years, but it's still not very much money. Looking at something like fair pay agreement, do you think that's going to change the dynamic in the sector?
It's a good thing. And if you take the fair pay agreement
I think it's
to
a good thing.
Yeah, you can see examples of this in other countries where there's been an agreement for different reasons, different causes, but there have been wide scale pay increases for care workers. And it's fascinating to see what happens. I mean, we do need to do this. Obviously, it needs to be funded. That's
Yeah.
the other side of the coin. But if you did do it, then I think what you see is that there's a danger that as you put the rates up, it attracts people in for the money. So obviously, I think care workers should be paid the same as the equivalent band in the NHS. But you do see interesting behaviours. So the more you put up a rate, the more the sector or the job becomes attractive to people who are focused on the money. So you'll see a bit of that.
Why do you work, Neil?
I work for the love of it, Charles.
Sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I do
But
work.
is that a bad thing? If people are,
No. I
if
mean,
it attracts more people because they get paid more, is that a
I
bad
think
thing?
it's a bad thing if that's the driver for working in social care. I mean, people should be paid the right rate, but it's incumbent on providers and the sector to find people who have the right values to provide high quality care, and that
Mm,
is not everybody. And
yeah.
so we need to be fussier about who we bring into the sector. And maybe as the pay rates go up and it's considered a more professional and more respected, partly because of the pay rates, but not entirely, then I think that does make the situation easier. What will happen, though, to a greater or lesser extent, is particularly if we're focused on UK born people who are living within 2 or 3 miles of the care setting or the home care territory, is that, and we've seen this in other countries, New Zealand and Australia are the obvious examples, but other parts of Germany have done it, is that as the pay goes up, then people decide that they don't want to work the amount of hours, they don't want to work the unsocial hours, so they'll give hours back. And what that means is that you end up with a fragmentation where you need to hire more people doing fewer hours because the people doing this job often have other things that they might want to do or a family member they're taking care of. And we've seen a high percentage, minority, but a decent sized percentage in both New Zealand and Australia where they gave hours back effectively. And they said, I only want to earn this much money from this job and I'll do it in fewer hours or in a more social time frame. And so that means you end up with more workers in the system working fewer hours. That isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's a little bit of a rostering headache. But we need to be careful around the edges as well. And this is a particularly an Australian example, is when these pay increases came in the residential care sector particularly, then it only covered frontline workers. So then the hospitality staff, the housekeeping staff,
Mm,
domestics and so on were like, what about us? Well,
mm,
they're not covered. So there was a tension there. So I think it's very difficult to apply a blanket policy to a very fragmented sector like ours and not expect there to be unintended consequences. But the net result, if it means care workers are earning more money, fantastic. I think it's going to mean that that the employers need to be creative and fussy about who they take on in the role, and they'll be able to be fussier.
Yeah, I think at the very least, everyone in the sector talks about parity of esteem and parity of pay with things like the NHS, and at least Agenda for Change is a very clear payment structure within the public sector within the NHS. So to have a kind of reflecting equivalent thing in social care is good. I guess your points are super valid. My only addition is like one is like how mandated is this going to be across all providers, and what abilities are going to be for people to for the market dynamics within it to decrease. Yeah, and obviously, how's it going to be funded? How's it going to be funded? And if you think like, it's not. I don't know what the numbers are, right? But let's say what is the budget? What is the spend on social care every year? It's probably I think it's 25 billion, maybe
So
something like that.
yeah, high.
25 billion. NHS 200, social care 25. Right?
Mm,
If wage bills go up 20%,
mm,
and wage bills are majority of what the cost of providing care is, that,
mm,
it's 3-4 bit, that's 3 or 4 billion a year. It's a few winter fuel payments or
mm.
one winter fuel payment. It's a lot. So I'll be interested to see how this evolves.
It's a lot, absolutely, yeah, yeah. Where is this money going to come from? And I think the rest of the economy, there's stresses everywhere, and so I don't think, and we've seen that the government, has many priorities. I think the NHS is an interesting player here. Are they friend or foe in terms of social care? And there are changes happening that are going to mean maybe that the NHS budget stretch more into the community in terms of prevention and virtual ward
Yeah.
and so on. Maybe that happens, and maybe there is a pathway for care workers, like in other countries, where there's more of a pathway towards nursing and towards the NHS. And I think if you made that pathway really clear, then you'll bring more people in to social care at the bottom, because there's a career pathway through. But having said that, the majority of the people in social care do not want a career as such. Generally it's the younger ones, and the average age in social care is older. And we know that, a lot of people, care workers, just want to work in the local community to give back. Yes, they want to be paid something for it. But I mean, they're the same kinds of people as those that volunteer, who are basically working for no pay. So I
Mm.
think, not that you should exploit that, but certainly it's not the priority that we often think it is. It should be, as a matter of respect, that people are paid well, but it is not the driving force. It's a hygiene factor. And I think people would come into social care. There's always going to be another career or another job that's going to pay more money, often locally. So I think that's really where you have to focus. And then, we've got AI, of course, jogging up the side of the field with potential to disrupt whole sectors.
Mm.
Some of those sectors might be more male focused sectors, and it would be great to get more men into social care. And maybe if some of those sectors, maybe, obviously taxi drivers and others, whatever this ends up being, who are displaced at scale, then we might end up with a better balance of genders in social care.
Well, I actually think that's going to be the white knight in shining armor coming over the hill, actually, because personally, many people will think differently to this. I think the potential for AI to disrupt the delivery of social care exists, but it's going to remain a people centric, like boots on the ground job for a very, very long time.
Yep.
We're going to get rid of doctors a long time before we're going to get rid of care workers. Doctors basically take data inputs, they crunch those, and they do like a diagnosis management plan, and Bob's your uncle. And that's like what ChatGPT does, like hands down. So they're going to go first. Care workers are going to be the last ones on the chopping block. Obviously, with the demographic like tsunami coming over the hill, and the expansion is going to be required in the workforce. Like, thank God, actually, because one of the other big sort of societal storylines is like, what jobs is everyone going to do? Outside care sector, accountants, taxi drivers, lawyers, whatever, all of these people who potentially will be disrupted. Maybe you'll be out of a job, Neil, because no one will worry about recruitment and retention in social care anymore.
Yes, that's very true. Yeah, no, absolutely, and it may not be an issue, but I do think, yes, the people that are displaced are not necessarily the right people who want to do the job. Having
No,
said
for
that,
sure.
as a general rule, the older you get, the more emotionally mature you get. Myself aside, and that is the cornerstone of considering other people and putting other people
Mm.
in. Plus, having kind of losing people through your life as well, and taking on the scars of all of that. That is really the training ground for care workers. That doesn't mean that younger people can't do that, because when I talk to younger people that are care workers and love the job, then it's often that they've had their own experiences that have made them emotionally mature faster than others. Cared for mum or dad, or have a brother or sister with a disability, that sort of thing. So I think you're right. There'll be there'll be a wasteland of other jobs going, categories of jobs going way before social care. And ultimately, if society has the money, whether it's through the local authorities or it's individually privately funded, then you always want to speak to a human, someone with
Mm.
compassion. And I think that means that we will get, yeah, you're right, a net inflow at some point in time. And then we might be in a happy place of the providers thinking, okay, this is a screening challenge for me now. I don't
Yeah.
to do the attraction bit. I just have
Yeah.
to say, right, hold on a minute. Who out of these people? And if you
Are the
look at
best.
a
Yeah.
generated CV, you're not going to see anything on there that tells you they're the right person. So how can we identify these people? And that situation could happen.
Before we get to that situation, obviously we're still in our recruitment and retention crisis. I know you've got some opinions on sort of brand social care. Um,
Yes, I have.
what do you think about that? And I guess the underlying question is brand NHS versus brand social care. Why is social care the poor cousin? Does it help or hinder what we are trying to do with the sector?
Well, I mean, I wrote in my book way back in 2017 that we should, as a sector, be able to use the NHS brand in a way that helps the public and care workers understand the role that we play in a wider health system and care system. And I think because the NHS has such a strong brand with the public, and social care is a fragmented. No one can really name, apart from perhaps Bupa and Home Instead and
Mm.
Breach. It's quite difficult. It's very difficult for care companies to build a brand locally, yes, but generally speaking, no. And this may not apply as much to the learning disability sector, but for elderly aged care, and it's quite interesting in Australia, they split the two things out quite distinctly, and there may be a benefit in us doing that. Is that in aged care, having a brand that is identifiable, like the NHS, that each provider is part of the wider NHS family, would have a positive effect, I think, because the public need to understand what is effectively quite an invisible service,
Mm.
one that the MPs say they never get any post about. It's all about potholes or some other issue. So bringing this together in one is going to be a positive thing. Whether we can make that leap, or whether the people who can make that decision make that leap or not, I don't know.
Two points to come back on that. The whole public perception of social care, yeah, totally. Like the public understanding of what social care is, who pays for it, what it does, where it happens, is extremely low,
Yeah.
extremely low. And the problem is that then whenever you're talking about political led change to the sector, you see it in every single parliament when they try and do this. We're going to reform social care. It always comes back to the public's number one issue, which is how you pay for it and whether you need to sell your house. And the reality is that that's not the problem within the sector, far from it, actually. But that's what the public sees as the problems. That's definitely one branding piece. My second point is 100%, I think, the social care lacks a kind of unifying voice and brand. And obviously, there are a lot of people that do a lot of good work to try and perpetuate that and further that. The problem is, and on the other side, you've got the NHS, which is, it's like McDonald's Golden Arches or whatever. It's probably one of the most recognizable corporate entities on the planet. That's gone the other way, which is brand NHS is so revered and so precious that no one can do anything about it. And no change can happen and no one can come in and do stuff because you get people taken to the streets. And so, there is a lot of change that needs to happen within social care. And I think, be careful what you wish for a little bit too much. Because if people start to see social care as part of the NHS, the ability to reform and make change will become very, very difficult. My 2 pence.
No, I think you're right. I think you're right. What I'm focusing on is you have to look at the upsides and the downsides and see, are we going to be net winners by helping the public understand that this is really one system. And within the care sector, we've always struggled with the connection points with the NHS, haven't we? It's always frustration. We've always felt that we're not haven't got a seat at the table, aren't being taken seriously. It's a mindset change. And I think we're facing a situation where we're going to have to think creatively and be bold and do different things than we've done before. Part of that is going to have to be how we help the public understand the importance and the value of it, because it tends to be individual stories. One challenge we have in the sector is, and I'll come on to this, is the voice. Our clients, our service users, our residents, they do not have a voice. Generally don't have a voice for obvious reasons. And the workforce doesn't have a voice, isn't unionized, doesn't have a voice. And the sector itself has multiple trade associations, which, are not speaking with a single voice like you might get in hospitality sector or other sectors. So it's difficult to engage with government with those challenges, and difficult to get your point across, because who do you talk to? And
Mm.
Australia, on the trade association point, and I'm not saying this has to happen at all, but my observation is that they combined their trade associations into one. So they have one lobbying voice with government. And I think, if you look at, well, think of the farmers, for example, pretty powerful group because of the trade association. The same with hospitality.
And they've got tractors as well.
And they have tractors, which are really important. So that's probably something
So
we
they can, drive through the streets and block the streets. So
yeah. And I think
need more of those.
yeah, even though they're actually, a relatively small group of people, they have a very loud voice. So I think we do need to think about that. And also we need to think about the message, because very often what we are saying is it's not fair. We don't have enough money. We're underfunded. We're in crisis. It's all going to go wrong. And I think that if you're a local potential care worker candidate, it's not, you don't run towards that. So, I'm going to be emceeing a care awards event in September. And I think those are wonderful events to go to, because that you actually get to hear of the majority of what is happening out there is wonderful stuff. And I think, obviously the media isn't interested in positive stories. We have to find a way of presenting ourselves better. And part of that, I think, is a brand problem, and part of that is a messaging problem.
It's quite nihilistic, isn't it? And it's quite, yeah. There isn't enough money in the sector, and I agree with that. But if that's the only storyline that people are telling,
yeah, no, absolutely. And
what are people going to think?
Yeah, exactly. And the frustration is, if you talk to care workers, they're getting tons of intrinsic rewards out of what they do, and they must be, because otherwise they wouldn't be doing the work. And a lot of that is around either a compulsion or a calling for the work. They feel they should really be doing it, or usually there's like a familial bond that's built between them and the people that they're supporting or caring for, where they become almost part of the family. And it's not only the recipient of the care that benefits, it's also the giver of the care that benefits from this often outpouring of love that they have to find a home for. And you find that it's very common. In some cases as well, work is more fun than home life for care workers in some cases. And if you walk into a care setting, particularly, or you're visiting 5, 6, 7 people in their own homes who perhaps haven't seen anyone else all day, it's joyful. You're welcomed. It's lovely to build relationships over a long period of time. And the NHS doesn't offer that to employees, because it's a production line, and they put people out. And you don't have to, you can be nice to them and you can learn a little bit, but really it's task orientated and out you go. Really, the offer is really quite compelling. We can offer. And I think there's another area which is very positive, which we don't build on. And this is particularly should resonate with younger people, is that we, as a sector, what you learn on the job is relationship skills, is how to deal with people, often in stressful situations. And those skills that you learn, whether it's active listening or blame-free language, or, kind of how you can deal with someone who's stressed or upset, how you can relieve pain, how you can understand and listen to what's going on and try and figure out what are the causes of the challenges the symptoms that they're displaying in their behavior. That is amazing grounding for relationships in the rest of your life. And I think we are missing that whole piece, in terms of there aren't very many other sectors that would ever give you anything around, the power of the human condition and how to use that to help your own life and your relationships with other humans.
Philosophical. It generally was very good.
Myself, by saying that.
No, that was very moving, Neil. Uh, uh, but you were talking earlier, enough of the philosophical. You were talking earlier about, no, I'm just saying,
Thank
I'm
you for
so,
giving me
so
that little segment to do that in. Thank you for giving me the segment to do that in, or not
that's fine.
interrupting it.
Yeah, 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 yeah. So moving from the philosophical
Yes.
to the practical,
Practical, yes.
you were talking earlier about, values, and it's like super important, and we want to have the right people in the sector, and it's not all about the pay because it's a really hard job. You need to make sure you have the pick of the best. I've always found it difficult to assess people's values. How do you do it?
Well,
Or how do you do it when you're interviewing a care worker? Practically, what do you do?
practically, what do I do? I would look for evidence that they are putting other people first. So if I could ask one question and one question only, it would be, have you cared for a loved one? That would be my
Right.
only question to ask if I only had one. And I think there are enough people out there, certainly after COVID, that have cared for a loved one. And that it tells me enough. Like, yeah, fine, won't bother with the DBS, you'll be fine. And I think those, if you've, and often you care for a loved one, you
Really, you think to that degree of surety?
yeah, yeah, I would say so. I mean, the time and time again, when there is research on high performers and what's
Mm,
the story, and I've done some of this research myself, there are two standout characteristics. One is that they have experience or contact with someone who is receiving social care, so they are a family carer. They've they've got someone in their usually family, might be a friend, who is ill or sick or needs support, and they're part of the solution to that. So they've demonstrated their values there, and followed by employee referral or knowing someone in the sector who's in the workforce. So then, if you have this contact with the workforce, you can think, well, I respect that person, I like what they're doing, I've talked to them, I understand what they're doing, and I think I could do that as well. So those are the two. Care experience usually wins of the two, but the combination of
mm,
like a Venn diagram of those two things overlap
yeah, yeah.
a bit, because people that care for others are known by the workforce anyway in some way or another. So that would be the number one thing for me. And it's difficult to, you're right, it's difficult if you look at a CV, and often people might hide the fact that they've cared for a loved one because they think, well, that's not, well, just gloss over that. Either it's not important or it's actually negative.
Mm,
But actually, it's a positive because even if I saw a CV with someone who's a job hopper from admin roles or some other role, that doesn't mean they're the wrong person for social care. What you need to identify is, have they got emotional maturity and are they putting other people first? So you might look for things like charity work. What are you doing that is not about you? So, at the other end of the scale, you might have sort of, Instagram influencers or whatever, like, well, I think you're more focused on yourself. And really what we want is people who are very focused on others. And they can prove or demonstrate that because they must have done something that they could tell you and you could check on
mm,
that was real. So that would be the obvious way to do it. You can use values-based interviewing as well. So you can ask for, tell me a time when, dot, 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 and try and look for patterns in the way they answer and examples that you think display a particular value. But fundamentally, we're looking for caring people who are often older, not always, people who have gone through life a bit, or they're young people who've had some kind of trauma, they're brought up in care themselves, or some of these other things I talked about, and that's really where you would start.
right. And referrals, good opportunity for you to talk about your current project, my friends.
Yes, yes, my current project. Yes, so Care Friends was born out of my experience as a care provider. So I had nearly 10,000 staff. I worked for the largest UK home care provider at the time. And when I joined, there was the staff turnover was 97%.
Wow.
Apparently, not just because I joined. Apparently, it'd been a previous problem, and so my immediate reaction was, "Well, the managers, they must be shouting at them, stroppy managers." But it wasn't at all. It was the staff turnover was happening clustered in the first few weeks and months of employment. So these are people coming in who decided either
Mm,
because we didn't treat them well or they didn't like the job, personal care,
mm,
gone.
mm,
So that was actually a recruitment problem that was driving a retention problem. And then if you look at that and you think, okay, well, I did a piece of work to say all these different sources, internet job boards, social media, walk-ins, employee referral, and others, average how many hours of care were delivered before that person left, times many, many people. And I remember looking at the figures, it was 180 hours total average for internet job boards. And at the time, it was 22 hours a week in our company, average hours of work. So a few weeks of work and you're gone. That's
mhm.
coming from internet job boards. People coming from that source are great, but that
Hmm.
driver of staff turnover and other problems, and employee referral was 4,500 hours. So I looked at those stats and thought, why aren't we just referring all the time? And it's not, nothing is as simple as that, of course. If you remove all the friction out of the employee referral process, so people do get paid their money and it's easier for them to share jobs, which is what Care Friends app is all about, removing the friction to let a process that wants to happen, then you will find that might jump from a few percent of all the hires a year coming from referral to 20% or 30%. It doesn't often go beyond 30%, and it can be lower if the culture in the company is poor. People don't want
Right.
their friends to work there. So there are nuances, but broadly speaking, there's definitely a pool, a 10, 15, 20, 25% pool of workers that we could recruit. And not only that, they're high performers, and not only that, they stay longer. So typically in the first 3 months, an employee referral will have half the staff turnover, be twice as likely to stay than someone who came from, particularly from internet job boards. And so those people, because they're handpicked, the screening has happened. We were talking about screening earlier. The screening is happening with the care worker first.
Yeah.
They're thinking, Charles, yeah, he's the sort of guy who would do this job. And so that's the story with referrals, is that nothing is a panacea, but there are, we can find another 10% or 15% of the workforce needs from this source. And the money that we're spending largely is going to the care workers. So far on Care Friends, 8.5 million quid's been earned by care workers, which
Wow.
largely they wouldn't have earned before.
Wow. Fantastic.
So it becomes a performance bonus system.
Yeah.
And, you're basically rewarding them for being a great recruiter, which is what they are.
Awesome. Okay, Neil. Fascinating conversation. I've taken a few things away from this. Recruit locally, use referrals, values-based recruitment. You've got a new book coming out soon. What else did we miss?
I think that
Pay people more,
I think
more
that
funding.
I think the process is important as well. So we need to look at the experience of applying for a job, because we're normally pretty awful at that in social care. So I think it's important to remember that, to get back to people. And because this is local recruitment, if you don't get back to people, then they're going to tell their friends outside the school gate, in the pub or whatever,
Yeah.
don't apply.
Yeah. Well, I applied to Neil's home care company and they didn't get back to me.
Exactly. Yeah. Don't
Yeah.
work for Neil.
And they've got 97% staff turnover. So
Yeah.
definitely
Yeah.
don't work there.
Down to that guy. Yeah.
Exactly. Great. All right, Neil. Well, it's been a fascinating conversation. I really appreciate you coming on the pod. Where can people find out more about what you're up to, or indeed how to improve their recruitment and retention?
Well, if you go on YouTube and you search for Neil Eastwood's Recruitment Masterclass, you'll find a whole free suite of video-based tools. There's Saving Social Care. Wait, here we go. Look, Saving Social Care.
Oh, very good.
And that's on Amazon. And that's a great source. And if you're interested in Care Friends, you can find that at carefriends.co.uk.
Brilliant. Thanks, Neil.
It's a pleasure. Thanks, Charles.